What it do, family and friends? Welcome back to the Church of Black Power. If you are not subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell so you can be notified whenever videos like this drop. Also, please make sure you're hitting the like and share button. Please help me beat up this algorithm so we can get this message out to the ears that need to hear. With that being said, family, welcome back to another Still on Point series. Part 3. This one, we honor our Grandmaster Teacher, brother, John Henrik Clarke, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Before there was an Eric Mays standing on business, there was a Dr. Henrik Clarke standing on business. And one of my first introductions to Dr. John Henrik Clarke was he was doing an interview, and I can't remember the exact interview he was doing, but he was doing an interview and he was telling this story about how a white woman came up to him and asked him, well, why can't you guys just lift yourselves up by your own bootstraps? And his response to that was, because you guys stole our boots, you bigoted broad. And from that day on, I love Dr. Henrik Clarke. There was nothing that a person could tell me about Dr. Henrik Clarke. They would say he's racist. They would say he was anti-Semitic, and he was none of those things. Dr. John Henrik Clarke was black first, and he was a representative of our people that I am so proud to have sat at the tutelage of, not personally, but throughout his books, throughout his interviews. You were able to see and grasp the type of man that he was and the type of business he stood on for his people. So, I'd like to jump into this video now. So, people who haven't met Dr. John Henrik Clarke yet would get a chance to see how our brother and Grandmaster Teacher is still on point. Let's get into it.
The subject of black history is in dispute in some quarters. A man named J.A. Rogers, who was laughed at 20, 30 years ago, not taken seriously at all, is being taken very seriously these days. A new book called Great Black Men of Color has been edited by our guest tonight, Professor John Henrik Clarke. Professor Clarke, there are some rather startling, to put it mildly, revelations made in the book about certain presumed facts of history that I'm certain will not stick with the general white historical community.
Well, I'll tell you, it became almost necessary for the Europeans to whiten up a part of black history when they began to take over the world in the 15th and the 16th century. And what Rogers has done is gone back and taken a whole lot of the white away and showed you the original black faces of certain people in history. In this 2-volume work, World's Great Men of Color, Volume 1 is devoted to the Old World, and Volume 2 is devoted to the New World. The first thing he does is to put Egypt in proper context and to show Egypt and the great personalities of ancient Egypt as black people. And
so what's going on here? And one of my favorite things about our brothers, who not only was our Grandmaster Teachers, they were our intellects. Nowadays, we don't have these type of intellects that challenge the mainstream status quo in the way that our intellects did back in the 70s with Dr. John Henrik Clarke, with Dr. Ben. So many people came out as intellects and challenged the worldview of black people in our history. So that's one thing that we're not seeing anymore these days, if you're really paying attention. Our brothers, in this case particularly, he was speaking about a book that came out that was actually given the history of Egypt, Kemet, or whatever you want to call it, and other various areas. However, what I loved about our Grandmaster teachers is that they stood on business. They came out and made sure they were very knowledgeable, and they can actually articulate the history in the way that it actually happened and not the way that it was taught. That is one of the best things that our Grandmaster teachers did for us. Put the power in us to actually know the history as it was actually happening, or as it actually happened, versus what white society wanted to teach us. Let's continue.
It might be startling, but he reveals that Cleopatra did not look like Elizabeth Taylor and wasn't a white woman at all. And I think his book starts in Egypt with the other great characters in Egypt, Imhotep, the real father of medicine, father of architecture, builder of the step pyramids, forerunner of astronomer, a man who was accepted as a god in Europe long before the birth of Christ. Imhotep lived about 5,000 years ago. And early Europe accepted Christ.
I just wanted to say this as well. This was the man who taught me that Imhotep was the father of medicine. After reading his books, all the people that, well, let me put it like this. All the things that have been given to the Greeks as feats of intelligence, like philosophy, medicine, politics, all those things came from Kemet. It came from Egypt. So when I heard about Imhotep, I was so upset because you take a Hippocratic oath in honor of Hippocrates when you become a doctor. But Hippocrates, he learned from Imhotep. He learned from other students who sat at the feet and the tutelage of Imhotep. But when you look in the Hollywood movie scenes, they make Imhotep either a bad guy, a demon, or whatever. So shout out to our Grandmaster teacher, because once he said this, and he said this in a couple of other interviews. This wasn't the interview that I first seen him say that in. But when he first said that, and I started doing my research, every time Hollywood came with a movie with Imhotep in it, I started noticing how they were portraying him, how they were depicting him. And they made sure that it's a bunch of brown people playing him, because even though they want you to think Egyptians are white, the villainy within the situation has to still be a brown or black person. Really a black person, because it's Africa, Northern Africa. So I started noticing that a lot. And I'm sure now that it's brought to your attention, you're going to start to notice more and more that African history, spirituality, African mythos, African ancestry are all not just demonized, but certain people, even if they try to change the color of the whole people there, they will maintain, they will leave black if it is a villain in their movie. Let's continue.
Edison, father of architecture, builder of the step pyramids, forerunner of astronomer, a man who was accepted as a god in Europe long before the birth of Christ. Imhotep lived about 5,000 years ago. And early Europe accepted quite a few Africans as deities, and Imhotep was one of them. He opens the book actually with this great African who was the world's first multi-genius.
You said that Rogers put Egypt in its proper perspective. What did you mean by that?
I mean, if European historians acknowledge that ancient Egypt was a black nation, then they would have thrown all Western history out of kilter, because Western historiography is based on the mistaken concept that if Egypt wasn't European, it was at least Oriental. It was neither. Because Rogers traced, as many competent historians, black and white, have already done, the southern origins of Egypt, and that the people who would later be called Egyptians came from deep within Africa, maybe Ethiopia and Somaliland. And
so from my studies, and this is just my studies, Egypt is literally a breed of migrating Africans. So Egypt starts, the Nile starts in Ethiopia. And there are two Niles. There's the White Nile and there's the Blue Nile. So the Ethiopians followed the Blue Nile up north and planted their agricultural situations along the lines of the Nile. And they were able to do that all the way up, going north into Nubia. And that's why from Ethiopia into Nubia, you see a bunch of unfinished pyramids, the starts of pyramids that started but haven't been finished. That was started but hadn't been finished. And then from Nubia, they migrated again north until they came into the land of Kemet. Khufu, the first king, well, if you want to call him a pharaoh, no, pharaoh would be the northern and southern together, which made pharaoh. Okay, no. So the first king within Kemet was Khufu, who was a Nubian. So knowing these things, and the Hittites and all these others didn't come in until way, way later. But Khufu himself, the first king of Kemet, was a Nubian. So, and then when you look at the stone cutters, the Nubians were known as the stone cutters. So a lot of the stone that was used in Kemet was sailed up the Nile River by the Nubians. But if you don't do the research, you won't know these things. They try to make you think that, you know, everything but you is Egyptian or Kemetic. They do that by saying, oh, the aliens built this. We don't know how the stones were moved. We still can't figure it out till this day. That's why our grandmaster teachers were so important. Let's continue.
They kept good relationships, good and bad, like all families, with the people to the South all of this time. And the proof is positive. And do not think that Rogers is out on a black thing or that most black historians are out on a solely black thing. Most of us got our most radical information from white writers that other white historians do not read, such as...
That's another great point too. A lot of people, when they hear this information, when we articulate this information, they will say, oh, that's black pseudoscience. Well, a lot of our grandmaster teachers got the information from your people. So how is this pseudoscience? If it's pseudoscience, you're telling me that your people are the pseudoscientists, so we should trust nothing that comes from you guys. We should trust nothing whatsoever, whether good or bad. Because if it's a black pseudoscience, that means that it's not real science. And if we got it from you guys, historians that you guys don't like to read, historians that you guys don't like to listen to, then that would mean in turn that you all as a whole should be ignored when it comes to any type of information coming out of you guys. That's what that means. But see, the more you look into it, the more you see, even the Greeks gave reverence to the Kemets. A lot of the things that is contributed to the Greeks already contributed to the Kemetics. And it's happening right now. Right now, we still have people running around here saying things that black folk has been saying for years. And then after they say it, now people want to start believing it because, you know, it's not a black face saying it. Or they want to spread it around more because it's not a black face saying it. We've had Dr. Ben for years, decades, running around talking about black people are the true Jews. And people talked all kind of mess when black folks claim to be or claim the nationality of the true Jews. But then Rabbi Redbeard comes out and says the same thing we've been saying, and he gets held up on a pedestal by a bunch of white folk, and he get held up on a pedestal by a bunch of black folk. The only people that isn't really holding him up on a pedestal is his own people, because they didn't want that information put out there like that. So now he's going around teaching his own people how they are Khazaric and not Israelite. That's why they call themselves Israelis over there. They don't call themselves Israelites because they have no ancestral tie to that land whatsoever. They came from Poland. They came from Russia, Germany, and all those other places and converted to Islam. Excuse me, not Islam, converted to Judaism. It says it in the Jewish encyclopedia when you look up Khazars. I've already done a whole broadcast on that. But it takes a white person to say it for people to start looking at it seriously. We've been saying for how long that black people are the Native Americans on this land? And people say, oh, they don't know what they are. They're just trying to be anything. And then you got Native Americans coming out saying, no, they are the actual Native Americans. So our ancestors, we've been fighting against this for a while. Our master teachers, our grandmaster teachers, they've been fighting against it way longer than we have.
Gerald Massey and his 6-volume classic work called Egypt, Light of the World, which proved positively that ancient Egyptians were black. Count Vorez and his Ruins of Empires. Gustav Hearns in a 6-volume work, Researches in the Ancient History. The early work of the American Egyptologist Breasted, Sir Wallace Budge. And so we are going to radical historians, especially Massey and his Natural Genesis and the Book of the Beginning, establish behind them the black perspectives in history. And if white historians accept the black perspectives in history, they would have to admit that the white perspectives in history is wrong. And I'm afraid they're not quite equal to that right now.
This interview was done almost 34 years ago. No, almost 30 years ago. Let's see, if another year, yeah, be 30 years. No. Excuse the hell out of me. 50 years. I don't know why I thought we were in the 2000s. 50 years, almost 50 years. That's real interesting. Almost 50 years. And we're still dealing with the exact same thing. They still don't want to admit that they're wrong. They're still trying to steal history. They're trying to replace our history with some immigrants and give the immigrants our history. So that I'm white and I say so, it's still in effect because they're trying their hardest. And they're trying their hardest to still control that narrative, control history, and move far away from them saying that they're wrong about it.
Well, what is the, if there is a black perspective in history, there is a white perspective in history. Mm-hmm. And you're saying, I'm assuming, that history is being manipulated for an end.
In itself.
In itself.
History, the Europeans began to manipulate history when they rose and began to expand into the broader world in the 15th and the 16th century because they had to justify the slave trade and they had to justify the colonial system that followed. And modern racism has its incubation in that period. You cannot enslave a man and say he's a human being, that he has humanity, he has and that he was one of the forerunners of the world's religion. You cannot enslave an African and say this about him. Because if you say he's a human being, then you're saying he's an extension of you. Then you cannot sell an African Christianity and call him a heathen and acknowledge the African contribution toward the creation of Christianity. So there's a contradiction in acknowledging that the man created Christianity, then come back and say that you are selling him Christianity because he is a heathen.
And that's exactly what happened. You have to change the mindsets of the world to justify the evil that you're doing to the world. You have to change the mindset of the world to justify the evil that you're doing within the world. And they did that all throughout their history, justifying their evil. When they came out the caves, they were barbarians. But the justification of that is, well, they were in the caves and they didn't have, any civilization or anything like that. They didn't know how to deal with each other. It was fight or flight. They're fighting over food with the animals. They're sleeping with the animals and all this other stuff. You get, okay. Then they come out of it. Then there's more justification. Oh, well, you know, they just don't know too much. We gotta, you know, teach them how to be civilized because, you know, they don't know too much. Woo, 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 woo. Okay, we go and civilize them. We civilize Europe, we civilize Spain. We come in to civilize America before America was America. And their justification for everything was made through religion, was made through, I'm white and I'm saying so. Let me call it the Pope. And the Pope says, okay, go ahead, do what you gotta do. I'm gonna make an edict that says that these people are not children of God, they're heathens. I'm gonna put the red stamp on slavery for you guys as well. But you wouldn't have been able to do any of that without dehumanizing the people of God. You wouldn't have been able to do it. Let's continue.
So the European had to literally strip history of the contributions of non-European people. To a certain extent, they did this in Asia. Now, what Rogers has done in these two books is to go back and set history in some kind of perspectives based on this information. And all of the information did not come from black historians. It came from the best records available from all of them.
Now, speaking of information, Rogers has alleged some very startling things, and we're using that word because I think in the context of having had only white history, anything black is startling, and so I'm saying it in a positive way.
That's a good point right there, and that's something that I try to make our brothers and sisters aware of when they tell me that they can be absolutely correct and literally shooting down all talking points from white people that come to them with these talking points and give them the truth. And then they just go into a deep denial. But when you've been taught Eurocentric history all your life, and someone comes and bring you the Afrocentric history, the true history of the world, your delusion, your psychoses that you've been living in your whole life is now shattered. And what did the Oracle tell Neo in the Matrix? Well, it wasn't the Oracle, excuse me, it was Morpheus. What did Morpheus tell Neo in the Matrix? Some people will fight to defend their programming. So you can't just go and try to wake everybody up. Hell, even I believe there's a scripture in the Bible that says you cannot tell a man that he's God unless he turns his face from you and make you his devil. So even though the Bible says that man is God, Psalms 82 verse 6, know ye not that ye are gods, all of you children of the Most High, but yet you will fall like man and die like the princes. It also tells you you can't go around telling man that he's God, or else he will turn his face from you and make you his devil. So this is where we're at with that too. We still deal with that as well. People trying to protect the reality that was given to them or they grew up in. You can't tell a man who lived in his reality 50 years thinking the world is Eurocentric and then go to him and have a conversation with him about Beethoven and how Beethoven's face mask implies that he's a black man. Oh no, you're going to have conversations. They're going to fight you to the T about it. But the funny thing is, they have no problem doing that to you. So when you're having these conversations, just keep in the back of your mind that they have no problem trying to steal your history. So it's time for you to put the back into your bone and make sure that you're giving them the actual history. Nullify their dumbness, their arguments, and their tactics with factual situations that can be looked up and shatter their belief system. Let's continue.
Some of his information has said that there were a number of American presidents who actually were black, that there were a number of prominent Americans that history has treated as whites, who by his...
I just want to make a quick comment on the president situation. So they say there's multiple presidents that were black. Technically, yes. However, it wouldn't apply. Because all those people that was running the country that were black, the country was not a country yet. So they were running the country when it was a Continental Congress. They were the presidents of the Continental Congress. America, once it was founded, signed Declaration of Independence and everything like that, I have not personally found any president that was black outside the Continental Congress. Let me be clear on that. Outside of the Continental Congress, I have not found any president before, unless the president had black blood in them, which there were several presidents that had black blood in them. But I just wanted to drop that tidbit of knowledge there.
Criterion or criteria of who was black and white, according to society's definition, were black.
Oh, no, not according to Rogers' definition now. Understand, and this is the irony of it all, and this is the trap. Black people have never written any definitions of race, any definitions of what a people mean, has been. I mean, they have never said that these people with these kind of traits belong here. Because modern racism had its development in the pseudo-scientific development of intellectual Europe after the 15th century. And they began to say that certain kind of people belong to certain kind of race, and they created the concept of race and racism itself. Now, according to the laws that's still on the statute book of the United States and some other parts of the world, one drop of us makes you a whole. Now, this ridiculous law and stipulation and measurement has given black people a lot of white people according to that law. Now, it has given us Beethoven, who was called a dark Moor. Now, he was probably one of the many olive-complected Europeans that you see in the millions throughout Europe. But in the States, in the United States, they say that if you have one drop of blood of a black person, you're a whole black person.
And he's absolutely correct. We didn't create any of these definitions. Black people have never created a definition defining any type of identity. It's been given to black people. The only time we created a definition, per se, when we decided to stop being called Negroes and started calling ourselves black. Because we understood that Negro was not who we are. It was given to us. It has derogatory situations on it. So we started calling ourselves black. That was the only time we had the self-determination to codify and then say what we are and what it means. But when it comes to other people, we have never created a definition on it.
Now, by this stupid law, we have a whole lot of white people. There's a whole lot of people that think they're white that belong to us. We might claim all of South America because the Spaniards were mulattoes when they got there, having been mixed with the Moors for nearly 800 years, and they were even before the Moorish conquest. Mediterranean Europe was highly mixed with Africans. Nobody thought anything of it because they were a mixture of power and influence and trade, and they got along fairly well together for hundreds of years before they turned on each other. And I don't say it did the Europeans any harm because the handsomest people in Europe are the olive-complected people who mix with the Africans.
You're saying, in essence, that there's no such thing as a race.
Oh, I maintain that race is the phoniest issue ever invented by the mind of man. The European invented and developed the concept of race. There's really no such thing as a race because nature created no races.
And if all races came from one race, how is there different races? Just wanted to throw that out there.
The whole race is a man-made thing, you know.
Well, how did people get to be French and English?
Well, different climatic conditions and migrations and amalgams of different people and migrations of people into your country, migrations of people out. All right. Now, this is an ethnic grouping as against what we call race. If you go back and you look at an old dictionary, you won't even find a definition for a race. Race grew out of the pseudo-scientific development of Europe.
And I went back and looked in the old dictionary looking for race, and race in itself means a breed of dog. That came from the Oxford Dictionary. Race means breed of dog. And what are they treating everybody like due to their race? Either you're going to get treated like a good dog, a teacup poodle or something like that, or you get treated like a pit bull. And that's why a lot of people say pit bulls are the black of the dog community. Just by the way pit bulls are judged. And some people like to say Doberman pinchers too. But we know for certain pit bulls are treated awfully just because of the way they look and just because of the stigma that's been put on pit bulls, when they are some of the most loving dogs in the world, some of the most intelligent dogs in the world, and some of the most protective dogs in the world. But I digress. In the Oxford Dictionary, it states that race is a breed of dogs if you go back far enough.
This is what Rogers was addressing himself to, and saying that according to your rule, which is ridiculous, a lot of you belong to us.
Well, in another context, if race is arbitrary, then could we say that being called black was a political term?
It's a political term, and a term which indicates our self-awareness at this juncture in history. And I think we really need it. We need to really bathe in blackness for a while. But I wish we'd get the bath over with and go on to something a little more important. Because black in itself is not an ethnic term. Black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are.
So, for all the people that are out there talking about, we're all black, no. Let's be clear. We're all black, but we're not all ethnically black. If you are a descendant of an American slave, you are black, but you are also ethnically black. That means you have experiences, you have a culture, you have all these things that have been passed down to you through your lineage. That's ethnically black. But the people that come here who are black and Jamaican, they're ethnically Jamaican. When they come here and they're black, but they're also Somalian, they're ethnically Somalian. When they come here and they're black, but they're also from Mali, they're ethnically Malian. When they come here and they're black, but they're from the Dominican Republic, they're ethnically DR. But yet, when black Americans say, we're ethnically black, foundational black Americans, we are the descendants of American slave freedmen. Oh, we're being divisive. But then when they go home and they start talking about other black cultures, they don't call themselves divisive. When you come into a room full of ethnically black people and you're talking about, oh, I'm Jamaican. I'm not black, I'm Jamaican. I'm not black, I'm African. I'm not black, I'm whatever. That's not being divisive. Because you're represented for your ethnicity, right? I seen a video the other day where this dude from Somalia was talking about Somalians aren't black and let me explain why. And he explained the exact same reasons that we explain over here. But what he's speaking about is ethnically black, which is understandable. You are a Somali. You might be black in the face of the world, but you are ethnically Somalian, which isn't the same thing as a Malian, which isn't the same thing as a person from, say, I don't know, Nubia, Nigeria, or any of those places in Africa over there. All the countries in Africa, and not everybody work together. Everybody don't work together in Africa. It's very tribal still in Africa. And we know this. But yet when we identify ourselves for who we actually are, we're divisive.
We are essentially an African people. Wherever we live on this earth, we're essentially an African people. And we relate to the millions of African people throughout the world, including the uncounted millions of Africans in Asia. The word Afro-American or African-American would probably be more appropriate and more honest and more in keeping with what we actually are. Because all of us are not positively, physically, real jet black. And so the argument now sometimes is between the supernationalists and the mild nationalists and blacker than thou, when blackness is a state of mind, a state of attitude, a state of approach to things that can exist in almost any of us, including from the blonde black person to the jet black.
And what our brother is speaking about here is the ethnicity. You can be ethnically black, and that's what he's speaking about. It's the ethnically black part. Being here in America. There is an experience by being ethnically black that no one else has around the globe.
And the jet black can be traitors, and they can be patriarchs. They can be a whole lot of. See, we've been everything in history from saint to buffoons. We're a complete people, and we need to start looking at ourselves as a complete people. And I think that once we convinced ourselves that we're black and beautiful, we'll stop saying it and just go ahead and be black and beautiful and release a whole lot of energy for more important things.
All right.
Did you get that? Once we start accepting that we're black and beautiful, we'll stop saying that we're black and beautiful and just be. Where are we today? Aren't we still online trying to convince each other that we are beautiful? That we are something different, that we are glorious, that we're God-given? So we still, 50 years, almost 50 years later, after this interview, we still have not gotten past the I love myself because I'm black part. We still haven't gotten past of, let me explain to you why black is beautiful. 50 years and we're still in a standstill about blackness. Like I said, still on point. The Still on Point series is meant to show you that what was said back then still applies today. And if you don't think that that still applies today, then you are drinking some of the contaminated water from Flint. And you need to stop it. Knock it off.
Since you said that J.A. Rogers was a chronicler that related events, what is there in these two volumes in terms of facts that would be beneficial to black Americans in the regaining of our lost heritage?
In terms of facts, is that J.A. Rogers goes through history and places in proper perspectives with documents the role of the black personality in history, beginning from the origin of man in Africa to the present time. And I'm saying that black people need a measurement of the role that they have played in history. And Rogers was the pioneer in the search for the black personality in history and his role. And this is important because through Rogers, in his first volume on the Old World, you can see what the Africans achieved and what the Africans not only achieved within Africa, but the conflicts among African and how these conflicts were settled. Egypt was invaded from within Africa, which began the decline. That was the Kushite invasion, led by that magnificent trio of black generals, Castor, Pianki, and Taharqa. And the interesting thing about these men, especially Taharqa, the last of the trio, is that he not only controlled what is Kush, was part of Ethiopia and the Sudan of today, and Egypt, but he invaded Libya and practically all of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran, all in those areas. And in those areas, he found both friends and foes. Now, if he found friends and enemies, if he found people in the Middle East willing to fight with him, he a black general. This tells you that color wasn't such a major factor, but the power, the rise and fall of power.
So when I first heard that, my family, my first thought was, we've had coons in our lives all throughout history. We had people who were willing to sell out our own people all throughout history. We had people who was working with the other side to take over. You had people who wasn't. So what that tells me is that the situation that we're in right now, my family, is not unique to just this generation. It's not unique to the last generation. The house Negroes that was in the house while the field slaves was working out there, those people who was telling the master what the field slaves was getting ready to do to gain their freedom, isn't unique to them, because we had people thousands of years before that prior working with people outside of Kush. And excuse me, I said that Khufu was the first Nubian. He was a Nubian king. He's actually Kushite, excuse me. The first king was a Kushite, which means Ethiopian. However, these people that we've been dealing with, who look like us but works with everyone else against us, we are not unique to the situation. So don't feel downtrodden. Don't feel like, oh, they got the coons on their side and there's more of them than it is us. How can we get over and all this other stuff? And we got people who look like us who works with them. Don't feel down on that, family. We've always had that situation popping. And we were able and continue to be able to get over, to get by, to how do you say, endure and elevate. They say what made George Washington a great general isn't the fact that he won any battles. No. He lost almost every war he was a part of, or lost almost every battle he was a part of. It was his endurance that made him a great general, they say. Okay. Well, our endurance and our elevation make us more than a great people. Let me say that again, in case the people in the back didn't hear me. If General Washington was great because of his endurance, Black Americans' endurance and our elevation within the endurance makes us a great people. The best people, if you ask me.
Rogers tells us some other interesting things in Volume 1. Actually, I wish we had time just to deal with Volume 1 alone, because it tells you of the early European invaders of Africa, after he finished telling you about Akhenaten and the great queens of Egypt, and that woman, the first truly great woman in history.
If you don't know who Akhenaten is, Akhenaten, which is one of my nicknames, Akhenaten, aka Tutankhamun, aka Tahuti's son, which means I shine through the wisdom. But in case you don't know who Akhenaten is, Akhenaten was the person who became a pharaoh in Egypt. Really, they say he was the first pharaoh, which means that which you will become. But he was a pharaoh in Egypt who saw that all these different gods were being worshipped in Egypt. And so what he did was he eliminated all the single gods and put up a representative of God, which was the sundial, the sun sigil, which represents God, because without the sun, there would be no life. So he was a person that eliminated all the multiple religions that was in Kemet at the time and put up a sundial and said, this is the image of God that you will now worship. Because God is one and all encompassing. Which people did. Some people still worship their gods on the low and things like that. But Akhenaten was the first Son of God. And not S-O-N, he was the S-U-N of God. For the people that don't know nothing about that history, now you have that information, because everything that Christ was given mostly was taken out of Kemet. Is this thing on? Is the mic on? Let me test this mic. Everything that you're reading in your basic instructions before leaving Earth Bible, ask yourself, why is it called the basic instructions before leaving Earth? If there's basic instructions, wouldn't there be advanced instructions? Did I just hurt somebody's heart right now? Did I crack somebody's skull open? Did I shatter a psychosis? If the Bible stands for and means basic instructions before leaving Earth, as the church tells you, then wouldn't that mean that there is an advanced version out there somewhere? Oh yeah, and if you studied under Dr. Ben, you would know that the advanced version is in Kemet. Every prophet from the Bible comes out of where? Kemet. Or was sent where to learn? Kemet. Moses, wasn't he trained in all the ways of the magician? Wasn't Moses the one that brought you your 10 commandments? Well, when you look into that and you start really researching the Kemetic terms and the outcomes of the situation, you then find the 42 negative confessions that the 10 commandments actually come from, which makes sense because Moses was raised and trained in the ways of the Kemet. He was raised in a prince role in Egypt. So he was raised in a higher knowledge of the Kemetics. Oh, God dang it, am I going too far in tonight? This is supposed to be a still on point situation here, but I'm going into the ancient science now. And this is why a lot of people are lost. A lot of people are really just getting played and getting taken advantage of by their churches, by their pastors. Just give me. But there is no glory actually going out to those people. There's no, how do you say? Let me put it like this. Malachi 3 says, will a man rob God? And when they bring that up, because they bring it up as a cash grab to make you feel like you're not doing enough. I've said several times over when that question has been asked, yes, and he do it by robbing the children of God, by taking their funding and not giving them any type of spiritual knowledge. Because anybody who's truthful with the spiritual knowledge would be able to give you all that information that I just gave you without trying to charge you for it. Whether it be in a church or a secret society. Oh, I said it. Whether it be in a church or be in a secret society, people are charging you for your own information. But I digress. Let's get back to Dr. John Henrik Clarke.
Hatshepsut. About the black generals who served in white armies. Cletus Nigra, who was one of the commanding generals in the army of Alexander. And he deals with the romance around Alexander, which shocked the hell out of some people, because Alexander not only did not die worrying about no worlds to conquer, he died in a drunken stupor, and all this is documented. He threw a dagger at Cletus Niagara, the black general, who differed with him in front of his high command, and he died in self-reproach after this act, not worrying about.
Did y'all catch that part, family? I just wanted to make sure y'all caught that part. He threw a dagger at a brother that didn't agree with him, and he was in high command. Tell me, how many brothers who are out here speaking up, how many sisters who are out here speaking up get daggers thrown at them? By the media, by government, and sometimes even by our own damn people. Even by our own damn people. If the media tells you to do it, if the media puts up a situation that they think is funny or anything like that, our own community sometimes will take it and run with it. The same thing they did with Bill Cosby, whether he deserved it or not. Same thing they did with R. Kelly. But when you have people who don't look like us doing worse things than we are doing, the media won't show you about it. They won't tell you about it. But when the new black media starts talking about it, the new black media try to make you aware about it. A lot of you, not all of you, but there's a lot of people who try to make it seem like it's corny that we even talking about this stuff. Like it's not important for our community to be aware of the predators that's taking advantage of our community. And I'm pointing the finger at the Democratic shields nowadays. And no, I don't care about Republicans, because black people don't vote to the tune for Republicans that we do for Democrats. But just look at this stuff. Let's continue.
About no more worlds to conquer, it's another thing. And another aspect of Alexander, which I call the so-called great, that we need to take into consideration is Alexander was a magnificent diplomat, probably one of the most brilliant diplomats ever. He really wasn't much of a warrior. In fact, one of the main reasons why Cletus Niagara could kid him, because he had saved his life on the battlefield a number of times. And Alexander, after he got into Asia Minor, was ridiculing Greek soldiers. And Cletus Niagara, the black general, told him, you wasn't, as for Greek soldiers, you really, in effect, not so hard yourself. And he reminded him of the time that he saved his life. And Alexander was a little bit embarrassed and insulted by having this mention in front of his high command. And he was drinking too much at the time anyway. Now, that takes a whole lot of romance out of history to treat Alexander.
So the brother told him, hey, why you talking stuff about those other folks over there? Guess what? I saved your life. You're not so hot yourself. How many times have you, let me rephrase that. How many times have you been in conversation with it don't have to be a bunch, just a napkin person, just one. It don't only have to be a bunch, just one napkin person. And they try their hardest to make it seem like white folks are so much better than everyone else. And then when you start hitting them with the hard facts, they start getting offended. Why this gotta be made about race? Well, if you were so great, why did you need slavery? If you're so great, why do you keep trying to change history? If you're so great, why is it that you're dying off? And so you're attacking everyone else because you're dying off, instead of convincing your own women to have your children. Like, when you have these conversations with them, oh, you become the racist. Why everything gotta be about race?
Alexander that way, but it's documented truth.
Well, what are some of the statements, facts, allegations that Rogers makes specifically about who prominent white Americans were, who he now says were black?
Well, he said that 5 of our presidents were black, and considering the fact that the ones that were black seem to be about the poorest presidents we had, I'd rather not bother about getting into names, but advise you to read the small book by J.A. Rogers called Our 5 Negro Presidents and argue with someone else. But
are there any of the families of these presidents alive who acknowledge that one of their ancestors who was a president was black?
I'll name one, which because there's been so much writing about it and so much proof, and because some of the families are still alive, and someone want to run this down. President Harding had black blood, had some of what we call Negro blood.
Mm-hmm. Where is this documented?
There were several articles on it. Alan Morrison, the late Alan Morrison, used to be New York editor of Ebony, did an article on it in the first Negro Digest years ago. But I'll tell you another one, which where the documents are a little clearer. That's Alexander Hamilton. He wasn't a president, but he was very prominent. Sure. Alexander Hamilton, whose mother was a black woman from the West Indies.
Are there any other prominent Americans that you can think of that are named in? This would be the second volume.
Mm-hmm. That would be the second volume, in which he names prominent Americans who obviously had what we refer to as Negro blood. Robert Browning, the Englishman, and he documents that too. Mm-hmm. You know, who had laid court to Elizabeth Barrett, and I
think Alexander Dumas was one of the people he named.
Oh, Alexander Dumas! There's no question about Alexander Dumas. He was a brown-skinned man with a bush. I mean, we don't argue about the Dumas, but there were 3 Dumases. Understand that? Not just Alexander Dumas. We talk about grandpapa, father, and son.
You see how well-versed he is when it comes to making sure that he understands the history, and by he, I'm talking about the host. He understands the history of it. When we talk about Alexander Hamilton, and we've been going around spreading this information for a while, and people have been calling us liars and things like that, but when we say his mother was from the West Indies, people don't like to address that situation. People will say, oh, I didn't know, I gotta go and check that out because I don't believe that that's true. But it is. And then we go off to Alexander Dumas. Dumas, which is one of my good friends, I don't want to say it's one of my good friend's ancestors. His name is actually also Dumas, so it might be one of his ancestors. But when you talk about Alexander Dumas, even our brother sat here and said, what? You can't just talk about Dumas. You have 3 generations of Dumases that were black. The son, the father, and the grandfather. And that's why it's so important to have our intellects actually speaking towards black issues and not speaking toward what they're paid to speak to. And not speaking towards what they're paid to speak to. We need you to speak to the real, not towards the bills. Speak to the real and not to the bill.
Now, one Alexander Dumas, black general, West Indian descent, was second in command to Napoleon. In fact, he was Napoleon's artillery commander in the Egyptian campaign. And when the French were voting for someone to take over the French army, Napoleon won by 1 vote. In other words, the French were liberal enough at that time to accept a black man as commander-in-chief of their armies.
Sorry, family. My mic was off. I wanted to ask, and this is a question to all the family who's watching this broadcast. Do you think that it would have been a whole lot different if the brother was put in charge of Napoleon's army when going into Egypt, when going into Kemet? Because it was Napoleon who ordered all the nose to be broken off the statues within Kemet. Any statue that had a black nose on it, it was Napoleon who told them to bust it down, bust it open. Take that nose off of their face, because it is a distinguishing. You cannot, there is no one else that has the nose of a black man or a black woman. No one. However, a black man or a black woman can naturally have the nose of everyone else. But no one can have the nose. The wide body, broad bell pepper nose that I love so much on my face. There's no one else that has that. So do you think if the brother got the position, became the general of Napoleon's army, would we have had that situation happen in Kemet? And I want an honest to God answer from you guys. I want to know how you feel on it, whether it would still be that situation because he was still working with the French, or whether it would be no, because he would have more empathy towards something that looks such as himself. Let's continue, fam.
I'm sorry they didn't elect Alexander Dumas. It would have saved them a lot. And a whole lot of things Napoleon did was useless and nothing but the washing of French ego and costing a whole lot of French money. The one thing I don't think Alexander Dumas would have done is to going into that icebox called Russia in the dead winter time. He wouldn't have played no fool like that. Now, the other two Alexander Dumas, you need to separate, because most people merge them. Now, the father of French adventure literature, the Three Musketeers and the like, that's one Alexander Dumas. Now, the author of Camille and the Romantic tradition in French literature, that's his son. Now, although father and son did not get along, but they stem from the same cloth. So there was actually 3 Alexander Dumases. One was a military man, served under Napoleon, who lost command of the French army to Napoleon by 1 vote. The other one who began the adventure literature, and the other one who began the romantic literature. And he was somewhat of a prince of Paris, a devil with the ladies, but there's no argument about these people.
Well, how do you suspect that these statements and beliefs are going to be accepted by white America and by the white historical community?
Well, they're not going to accept them readily, but if they read the documents, there's not much of an argument.
Well, they can always show you their documents, can't they?
Well, they can show me their documents, but one cannot outbalance the other. I mean,
you see how he just said that? And we need to make sure that we're on our square when that comes up on us too. We need to make sure that people understand just because you got a document doesn't mean that it supersedes my document. My document is my document. Your document is your document. So where do we go from here? Either you're going to research my document and I research yours, or you're going to continue to press your document even though you know your document is wrong. And if they're doing that, then you know that they're not serious. You can't argue with a fool. My mama used to tell me this. You can't argue with a fool because from a distance, you can't tell who the hell the fool is. so people outside of the argument can't tell who the hell the fool is. I had a conversation with a woman today, and she posted a video of a woman talking about how she don't want a relationship, but she wants a person to make her emotionally safe enough so they can have sex every day. But then she don't want him going out and all this other stuff. She wants him to act right and all this other stuff, but she don't want a relationship. When I respond to that video and I said, what you're asking for is a relationship. And it is crazy to think, and not just crazy, but moronic to think if you tell a man that you don't want a relationship, that he's gonna be sticking around, cuddling you, getting emotionally connected to you, or anything like that, enough to the point where you feel like you're emotionally safe. This woman comes back to me, and not the woman who's in the video, but a woman who's actually reposted the video, and you can tell that she's in her 50s, 60s, somewhere like that, because she got a bunch of grays in her hair. She looked good now, don't get me wrong. But you could tell that she was over the 50-60 tagline. And this woman came to me. Well, she responded to me and told me that I didn't understand what was going on, because I said the woman needs to take personal accountability with the men that she's choosing. You're choosing, excuse me, had a burp there. You're choosing to select a certain man and then tell the certain man you don't want a relationship. That certain type of man also don't want a relationship. So then when you start becoming more clingy as if you're getting into a relationship, the man back off. Now it's the man's fault. When you literally sat here and did what you did in order to make sure that you wouldn't have a man that needed to stay or wanted to stay, who felt like they want to stay. Let's put it like that. This woman literally told me that personal connection and personal safety is not the same thing. And I told her, you're living in a delusional realm, which I do not operate out of. Have a good day. God bless. This woman came back again and said, no, it is not the same. And don't feel bad because you're getting told off by a woman, this, that, and the third. And I told her, ma'am, let me let you know this. You are in a delusional state. There is no need for me to argue with you, because you're in a delusional state. You're going to believe whatever your delusion is showing you. I said, there is no way in the world you can tell a logical thinking person that you can get emotional safety without getting the emotional connection. And there is no way in the world you can tell a logical thinking person that you can get emotional safety and just be randomly banging people, telling them that you don't want a relationship, but you want emotional safety. There's a lot of people in this world that is ludicrous in their thinking, lunatic in the way they act, and emotionally unstable in the way they feel. So all the extra arguing with people who just want to argue, people, my brothers, my sisters, don't do that. If you're trying to educate a person and you can see that they're truly not educated, that's one thing. But if you can see that they're just bringing up arguments that makes no sense and is nonsensical, then all they're trying to do is egg you on. Because from afar, people who watching can't tell who the fool is in an argument. Let's continue.
Now, I've seen there's a whole lot of things that white historians say that has nothing to do with documents at all. They just open their mouth and say it. Like Christopher Columbus discovered America. Now, he's discovered people here. He discovered a whole lot of people already in America. So he discovered America. Okay. Now, and they just arbitrarily say that the Europeans brought naturalist civilization. And actually, the Europeans destroyed more civilization than they brought. And I can go to white documents and prove this. I don't have to go to my documents. According to their documents, I can prove that they destroyed more people and more civilization than they built. All right. Another thing which Rogers brings up in another one of his books called Africa's Gift to America is the pre-Columbian presence of Africans in the so-called New World. That Africans were here not only before Columbus, but according to Professor Wiener in a 3-volume work called Africa and the Discovery of America, he may have been here before the Indians. Now,
let me be very clear on this as well. There's a book called They Were Here Before Columbus that details this. I don't have to go to that book because even though I am FBA, I was born, raised here. My father's from Sweetport, Louisiana. My grandfather's from Sweetport, Louisiana. And his grandmother was Blackfoot. My mother's from Dangriga, or what most people today would call Belize. However, when Columbus got here, we have records that show that he found my family members in St. Vincent on my mother's side of the family. And when he went to the Arawak and asked, who's the Hutbaguttoy, which is Greek for black people, the Arawaks told him that they came selling from overseas, trading gold and silver spear tips. And if you look into history to see who did that, you would see and come to find out that it was Abu Mbakri, one of the emperors of Mali. And he gave up his throne because he went on a pilgrimage across the seas and never came back because he fell in love with the people across the seas. And he gave his throne to his nephew by the name of Mansa Musa, who is recorded to be the richest man to ever live. See, this is how history works. If you go back farther enough, you're able to find lineage, lines, and how things work. Just as proud as I am about my lineage from Abu Mbakri and the 13 different people that he sailed over from, whether it's from Abu Mbakri or whether it's from the 13 people he sailed over with, I'm just as proud as my lineage from the foundational Black American freedmen. And that's why I don't play sides when it comes to this situation until it comes to that situation. If you're disrespecting foundational Black Americans, you're automatically going under the bus. And you can't sit there and say I'm being divisive or anything like that because my mother's side of the family comes from Central America, St. Vincent. Do not try to play with me. Do not try to play with foundational Black Americans. Because you don't have the right to do so. You don't have the right to speak the way that you're speaking about it. because you don't even know your own damn history. And as somebody who has lineage down that way, let me let you know, a lot of people down that way don't know the history of the real history. They still believe. A lot of them still believe that Columbus came there and found the Arawak alone. The Taino people don't even exist when it comes to those type of people and Columbus. Even though the Taino was the ones that was literally murdering people and taking the slaves off of their ships and letting them live on the land with them in St. Vincent, that history has been it's gone. It's gone. When it comes to the people that actually comes from the bloodline, the lineage, for some reason. You don't have to like that I'm saying this shit. I'm telling you the truth, 100%. Research it. Talk to people from Dangriga, or what they call it, Belize. Talk to people whose family came from St. Vincent and see what their mindset is and tell me if I'm lying. Let's continue.
The original documentation on this came from white historians. And so many times when a white historian is arguing with a black historian, the one thing he will probably have to do is to go back and argue with the white historian from which the black historian got the original base information, and he extended that research further than the white historian.
Did you hear what our Grandmaster teacher said? And this is what ends up happening. This is how a lot of people get put on radars, because black folks, we find what white folks have said, where they have admitted to be liars, where they have admitted to be manipulating the history, his story. And then when we bring it up, they want to argue against us and talk stuff about us and all this other stuff. And then when we make them know, or make it known that, hey, we got this from this person, or not that we got it from that person, hey, this person in your community is also saying the exact same thing that we're saying. All of a sudden, they'll stop coming at you for a second so that they can go over there and have the argument with people who look just like them, who are saying the things. Same thing happened with Rabbi Redbeard. That's not his real name, but I'm not going to put his name up here. I'm not giving him any damn glory, because like I said, we've been saying these things for so many years. So I'm not going to give him any type of promotion, because he came out a few years back saying the same thing that we've been saying for decades. But Rabbi Redbeard, oh yeah, they started going after him too within the Jewish community. Fill in the blank, they go after that person. The reason why Kyle Rittenhouse is so glorified, even though he went after two people in his own community, is because those people in his community was representing black folks at the time. Tell me I'm wrong. Let's continue.
Now, the white historian is in a bad fix right now because he's hung up with a lie. And because he used to open his mouth and say something and people believe it without question, now they are questioning it. I can snow him under with documents, and mostly documents written by other white people repudiating him. So I'm not worried about the document war. I know I can win that one.
Professor Clarke.
No living.
My apologies, family. Let me just go ahead and move that out of here real quick. second. Sorry, family. Sorry, family. All right, so there we go. All right, so Dr. Clarke said something that we keep on hand. We got a gun full of facts. And the second we start shooting off our bullets, all of a sudden there's a problem with us shooting off those facts. Pow, 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 fact, 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 fact. There's a problem with those facts all of a sudden. But Dr. Henrik Clarke has always did two things. He was able to stand on his square, and he was able to stand on facts. Without a care in the world, unapologetically stand on those facts.
Because he's hung up with a lie. And because he used to open his mouth and say something and people believe it without question, now they are questioning it. I can snow him under with documents, and mostly documents written by other white people repudiating him.
Let me also say this too. This is how the Democratic Party feel about Black Americans right now. I'm going to rewind what he said, and I want you to put it into the context of the Democratic Party thinking about Black Americans. And please tell me in the comment section, tell me, am I reaching or am I being absolute? So let's run that back.
In here before the Indians. Now, the original documentation on this came from white historians. And so many times when a white historian is arguing with a black historian, the one thing he will probably have to do is to go back and argue with the white historian from which the black historian got the original base information, and he extended that research further than the white historian. Now, the white historian is in a bad fix right now because he's hung up with a lie. And because he used to open his mouth and say something and people believe it without question, now they are questioning it. I can snow him under with documents, and mostly documents written by other white people repudiating him. So I'm not worried about the document war. I know I can win that one.
Professor Clarke, how do you distinguish between the words Negro and black?
I don't distinguish. I distinguish between the word. Way I have the word Negro is by dismissing it. And I dismiss it because there's no such thing as a Negro, because there's no Negro people and no Negro land. This is an adjective that somebody made a noun out of and slapped on a people against their will. And I dismiss the word Negro.
All right, let me just say this as well. Because I had a group of people who read Chancellor Williams' book, and they tried to say that we are a Negro people because inside of that book there was a map drawn called Negro Land. Let me explain something to you guys. A map drawn, especially a map drawn that shows slavery ports, and in that area where the slavery ports are that says Negro land, does not mean that that is the actual freaking map. I have to calm myself down because I don't want people, especially my own people, to think that I'm angry with you guys. What I'm angry, not really with, but at. I'm angry at the ability of our people to read something without context. I'm angry with our people about being able to read something and then automatically making it something where white society benefits, like calling ourselves Negroes. one of the women I was in a space on Twitter. That's when that happened there. And one of the women in the space talk was speaking about, well, I got Negro on my birth certificate. That's what we need to go by. No, you sound crazy. You chose Negro because it said Negro on your birth certificate? Without the context of what was going on during the time when you were born? Where Negroes were considered less than people? See, this is the issue that I see. But it was literally by our ancestors, our grandmaster teachers. It was foresaw already. And they were trying to warn us about these visions that they were having. Things that they saw that they didn't understand, but they spoke about it because they knew that it pertained to our community. Let's continue.
Word black can relate to a whole lot of people, and it can become confusing. You see, people must relate to land, history, and culture. And this is what limits the word black.
Did you guys hear that? You must relate to land, history, and culture. And he said that's the meaning of this word, black. So when we're speaking about Black Americans and us wanting to be called FBA, freedmen, whatever, and people are saying it's divisive, Dr. John Henrik Clarke already told you why it wasn't divisive. Land, culture, and the different things you experience there in that sense. I can't just go to Africa and say I'm African. I can't go to Mali and say I'm Malian. Mali has its own customs. I can't go to Nigeria and say I'm Nigerian. Nigerian has its own customs, which I don't apply. I don't recognize. I can't go and say I'm Ethiopian because Ethiopians have their own customs that I don't recognize. Not that I don't recognize them, I don't. How do I say this without sounding? I do not celebrate or support some of those customs because I am not from there. The same way they don't celebrate and support some of the customs coming from Black America because they're not from here. But not everything is our customs, just like not everything is theirs. I just want to make sure that I was very, very clear when I was explaining that. Because Black Americans aren't the divisive ones, to be honest with you. It's always everyone else outside of Black America when you're Black. That's divisive. You only want to be Black when you come to America to be Black. So now you know that Black Americans got the whole foothold on the whole civil rights situation because we're the only ones that actually did that. We're the only ones that actually did that. So you know you need our support. And without our support, you lose. Nobody supports you. That's why they come here and we don't go there. Anyway, let's continue, fam.
Because if you say black, and what is the black land? I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about. If you say English, an image comes before your eyes, good or bad. the changing of the guards, Buckingham Palace, stout-hearted, the Bengal Lancers, If you say French, good cooking, great lovers, Napoleon, all that. All immediately you got an image. But you say Negro, what comes before you? No images, really. A condition. And a people is not a condition.
Because there have never been a place called Negro land. It's always been a condition, but never a place called Negro land. So for all the people who read Chancellor Williams' book and they're taking it as what is it called? Instead of an allegory, they're taking it literally. You need to really reevaluate who the hell you are. Reread Chancellor Williams' book, because I think that you misread what he was actually saying. Let's continue.
A people must have a name that relates them to land, history, and culture. And so therefore, the name of a people, if it's going to be authentic, cannot be black. That can refer to how the people look. The name of the people have to relate to the land of origin. Now, no one is having any difficulty saying Italian American, Greek American, French American. I don't think they should have any difficulty saying African American or Afro American, as the case may be.
And now notice, they didn't have any problem saying African American over the past few years. They have a problem saying Black American. They have a problem saying foundational Black Americans. They have a problem saying the descendants of American slaves.
Now, these are people who are black in the main. But let's get something straight. All Africans are not black. Black is the prevailing color in Africa. There are Africans who have not been mixed with any white people at all.
Did you see what he just said there? All Africans in Africa are not black. There are some Africans who are black. Prevailing has no mix of European at all. So when we're speaking about black as a culture, you have to understand what we're meaning. We continuously keep on telling you. Let's let our brother continue.
Who are light brown. And they've always been that way. And they're just as African as the blackest of the Africans. So if we got hung up on a narrow definition like black without explaining that it has elasticity that extends beyond a person being jet black, then we get ourselves into another trap. We get out of one trap and get into two. So now let's qualify what we're talking about when we're black. But when we're speaking of a people on a world basis, then let's relate them to land, history, and culture, so we'll know what we're talking about. Until someone creates a nation called black, from which we emulate, or black land, or black area, or black borough, then I'm afraid that the word black is rather limited.
Land, history, culture. Land, history, and culture. Land, history, and culture, which Black Americans have been a part of all and have all, with the exception of the land, because they stole the land. History and culture goes in with that. Let's let our elder finish, and then we're going to finish out here.
I'd like to thank you very much. You've certainly said quite a few things. The book, The World's Great Men of Color, is undoubtedly going to cause quite a stir and be of amazing educational value. Thank you very much, Professor Clarke.
Thank you.
So, family, with all due love, respect, we are respectful and a hard-driven people. We've been fighting for years upon years upon years. And we had grandmaster teachers fighting for years upon years upon years. Nothing new is under the sun, family. If you study the grandmaster teachers, like Dr. Ben, Dr. Clarke, and many others, you will see that our people, our ancestors, our grandmaster teachers are still on point. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell so you can be notified whenever these videos drop. But also, please make sure you're hitting the like and share button so that we can beat up the algorithm together, which will help us get this message out to the ears that need to hear. And please, leave me a comment. Let me know. What do you think? Tell me what you think about our grandmaster teacher, John Henrik Clarke. Tell me what you think about what our grandmaster teacher was saying and whether you believe that he's still on point. Peace, family.